Very good morning, and you're most welcome to today's Signpost webinar. After a rather stormy week, we hope that you weren't too badly affected by Isha and Jocelyn visiting Ireland. But as you know, we are passionate about hedgerows here on the Signpost webinar. And during the last week, our hedgerow network has provided important shelter to our birds and other wildlife. And in case you didn't know, surveys have shown that Ireland has almost 700,000 kilometres of hedgerows. And just to put that into perspective, this is the same distance as a return trip to the moon. So we're seriously endowed with hedgerows in this country. So this morning, we're delighted to be joined by Dr. Keena, who's countryside management specialist with Teagasc and expert in hedgerow management. And today we'll be discussing hedgerow planting and the importance of getting it right. Catherine, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Mark. How are you?
Great, great. So, Catherine, you're going to today. This is really probably the best time of the year to be having this conversation. You're going to be sharing some tips on getting it right.
And I suppose I've talked a lot about hedges, and there's a lot I could say. So I'm concentrating today on some new changes. And very, very, very key principles. If we could just understand the principle, there's a lot of ways of doing things to avoid doing wrong things. So, yeah.
So we have a lot of hedgerows to be planted over the next few months through the Acres program in particular. What sort of effort is going to be required by farmers between now and March, I suppose, is usually around the time that it wraps up at?
A lot.
Do we have any estimate on the amount of hedgerows that have to be planted?
Yes, I have all the details in it, but it's about 2,000 kilometers.
Okay, that's serious amount. Pat, sorry about that technical hitch there. Good to see you this morning. You're going to help us out with questions later. You're keeping well.
Yep.
Great. So, Catherine, I think we'll get straight into that because I know you have a fairly sizable slide deck to share with us this morning. So just remind people while Catherine's getting set up that today's session is being recorded and will be available on the Teagasc YouTube channel, as well as the presentation on the Teagasc website. And of course, if you don't have the chance to view the video, you can tune into the podcast version of the Signpost series on whatever platform you use for podcasts. So, Catherine, we'll hand over to you and look forward to taking questions at the end.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, so the four kind of themes is the importance of hedges, planting principles, acres, and in particular changes to acres, and the future industry needs. So on the importance of hedges, hot off the press yesterday from the launch of Ireland's 4th National Biodiversity Action Plan, which has, I must say, was the amount of people in the room and the amount of media attention compared to the first 3, which I've been involved in all along. I mean, it's just our time has come for biodiversity. So there's a lot going on in the media. You'll hear about this one. And with regard to today's talk, it's just all I'm going to say is that hedges are included in that biodiversity action plan. They're a habitat, and we want to look after them. Another recent development was the sorry, I just want to get rid of my black. The Joint Committee on Environment and Climate Action reported on the recommendations of the Citizens' Assembly, and they came up with their own recommendations out of the large number of recommendations from the Citizens' Assembly. So again, just to focus in there on sorry, I just want to get my. Okay, sorry, yeah. Yes, so with regard to hedges, talking about a new national strategy for the protection, maintenance, restoration, expansion of Ireland's hedges legislation. But I think the third point is the one I want to highlight today, that again, this talk about sufficient results-based incentives must be made available to support all aspects of proper management. In particular, the new CAP schemes should recognise and reward good hedgerow quality. So I suppose the message for today then, that with all of this, hedgerow quality will be more important than ever. as well as quantity. So, and again, the importance of hedges. Sorry, I'm just trying to get rid of the black line on top, Mark. Where can I get rid of it? No,
we can see it fine from our
yeah,
side,
yeah, no,
Catherine. If that's
it's just
if you
annoying me, but I shall leave it. Yeah, yeah. Otherwise, I might leave.
if you want to stop sharing and reshare,
No, I
that
don't
might.
think it'll. Yeah, no, that's okay. So look at hedges are important for biodiversity. In particular, the birds of 110 birds regularly recorded in the countryside bird survey in Ireland. 55 use hedges. Half our birds use hedges, all for different things. 35 to nest. Our mammals that use hedges, the hedgehog shrews, pine martens. That leads to the birds again, the barn owl out finding the shrews along the hedges. All the bat species fly along hedges and use them. Not all our bees, but some of our bees, some of our moths, and some of our butterflies are associated with hedges, and some of them specifically as tied into hedgerow species. Sorry, why isn't it moving on? I'll just stop sharing again. Yeah. Okay. Apologies now. Apologies for this. I never had this problem before.
It's just not moving on, is it?
It's not moving
Yeah.
on, but it should
Okay.
be. 20 minutes was. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Hopefully it'll work now. So hedges are as well as the biodiversity and the food, the shelter. Everyone, you mentioned shelter there in your opening, which would be of relevance this week. And again, a farmer lately particularly wanted me to talk about the flooding value. So look, everyone has their own angle. They're all absolutely, have their own contribution. Hedges contribute to so many different parts, and in particular to the carbon, which is very relevant now, both as a stock and as a sequestering while they're growing actively. So that's the importance of them. Planting principles, just a couple of some of them are kind of random. We summarized out of Hedgerow Week in 2023 three clear messages: that while bigger and denser is better, we always want diversity. We don't want them all the exact same. But the most important thing, getting bigger in writing there, is only healthy hedges will continue to deliver for biodiversity and carbon. So that's my overriding concern, is healthy hedges. Okay, so coming down to planting then, considering we want quality and we want healthy hedges, the first question and only question I would ask a farmer, for an advisor to ask them, is which hedge are you planting? You can see there, they're on the right and the left, and we all see those as you drive through the countryside, two totally different hedges. So we should never ever talk about hedges without saying which one we're talking about, because that has led to very, very wrong messages, if you know what I mean. So the one on the right we call our tree line hedge, and the one on the left there we called our topped hedge. And again here, the one on the left has never ever been topped, so it's a tree line hedge. And the one at the back there is a topped hedge, and correctly has thorn trees allowed grow up inside it as well. So the next message to remember is, and I was working with Tier Lawn advisors during the week. We were on a training day, and one of them said, it just so, and maybe I've never said it as clear before, but the first thing before you plant a whitethorn is to remember that whitethorn is a tree, and that's what it wants to grow into being. If we don't do anything, if we want something else, we have to understand how it grows and manage it accordingly. So whitethorn is a tree, a most beautiful tree, my favorite tree, but that's another thing. So, and the wherever you cut, now that's an ash we're looking at there, but it was just a picture I thought during the week it demonstrated clearly. It's the same with the whitethorn. Wherever you cut the leader, you will get multiple buds bursting beneath the cut. So you can, I don't mind where you cut it, as long as you know why you're cutting where you are, and as long as it leads to a healthy hedge, because this is where we've run into problems. So that's an ash there, but similarly for a whitethorn, wherever we cut it, the growth is going to build up there. So if we want a topped hedge, like the one on the left in the photos earlier, or in the first photo, only hedges with dense growth at the base should be topped, because only they can support a topping. So the one, the one on the top there, clearly, if that's being topped every year at that level, without a base to support its growth, it's a cut, death by a thousand cuts. And we see that with a lot of the hedges, which were cut down maybe 50 years ago for the first time from being tree line hedges, but rather than being cut at the base, they were cut in the middle and have no base to support them. And then if you go on to cut them severely at the same level every year, there is no growth there to support and then you have ivy and brambles clambering over them. And while I love ivy and the blackthorn bramble, I don't like them clamber over a hedge, but usually it's not the ivy or bramble's fault, it's the fault of the hedge. And I am concerned that it's still a problem with the new hedges that are being planted, because so that is my mission in life today, is to try and get the new ones on the right road. It's a shame not. So there's two ways then, if we want that topped hedge. One, and maybe I don't talk about it often enough, it's never going to be the mainstream possibly, but it is a fantastic, I love it. It's laying the hedge. So you leave it, you do not top it today or in 5 years' time when it comes to the top of the wire. You let it grow on, you never top it, because the hedge layers want that tall bushy hedge. They will cut out half it, or the side trimming it when they come to lay it. And I said 15 years, I'm sure people will say different, slightly different. It can be, but give or take. That's what we're talking about, letting it grow up there and then laying it down. And you can see again where they're cutting it is at the base, okay? Or that could be coppiced at that point by cutting it right through. But that's one very, very good option for hedgerow management. The second one then, as I said, we need to understand how trees and shrubs grow. Apical dominance means they grow into a tree. And that beautiful picture on the bottom is my beautiful tree line hedge. And that is what we get if we don't manage the hedge. But that is, I said, it's tree line hedge. Okay. But if this is the hedge we want, first of all, we need to make sure that farmers understand that the other hedge is very excellent, because maybe we don't talk enough, or I haven't talked enough about it in the past. So if you want your tree line hedge, fine. But if you want this one, this is where you have to have a plan of action from day one. So if you're not going to plan for laying it in 15 years' time without topping it in between now, remember that, then if this is what we want, this is the way we'll talk about doing it. So the topped hedges, again, we have the good and the bad. The good ones on the top of the right is the perfect one, with the top of the left is excellent. It's one in Grange, where we only started leaving the whitethorn slip about 5 years ago, and now it's on its way into being it's crooked because it didn't come straight from the base, but it's good. But that's moving more into the management there. But clearly what we don't want in our new hedges is either of the ones at the bottom, okay?
And Catherine, the frequency of topping, imagine that's probably each year, is it?
Well, I mean, I like little and often, but that's
Yeah.
only if you're providing the flowers and fruit in another mechanism
Okay.
on the farm, if you know what I mean. I'll show you in a moment now about rough cuts. So little and often is like your whitethorn hedge thrives on being cut, but only if it's cut a little bit, tiny bit further out each year. And yeah, okay. So for our topped hedge, then to have the reason we want that big, the reason the hedge, for a healthy hedge, we need that dense space if we're going to keep topping it. That is also excellent for birds' nest egg, and the amount of volume in a hedge like that, it could be up to 15 foot high. We do need to keep the apical dominance cut, so we need to keep the top cut. So it's as high as the hedge cutter will go, so it could be 15 foot high or whatever, apart from the occasional trees. But that's superb then. Bigger and bulkier the better, for the birds to nest, for all the mammals, at the base, etc. And clearly for carbon, that has to be good. It's just a mass of growth, of dense growth. So, and then providing the trees are left, so clearly here, well, we can't really see the height there, but clearly there's not a thorn tree in sight. So where that's cut annually, or even every second year, you will have 0 flowers for bees and 0 fruit for birds. So I think that's what we need to be clear about. So the value of the topped hedges is primarily in the dense space, because the majority of that best practice topped hedge is in the base. You can see there are the things I was all talking about, the wrens and the thrushes and all those that live in that dense undergrowth, and the associated mammals crawling along the side. But it can still have some of the canopy biodiversity when occasional thorn trees are allowed to grow up. And then you have some of the canopy biodiversity and a lot of the other biodiversity. And I said we would recommend always having both types of hedges on the farm, or at least having some of the tree line hedges. So to plant this topped hedge, this best practice topped hedge, we choose hedge or species that tolerate trimming. We plan for occasional whitethorn trees, and include another as in additional tree species. We protect these with the tree guard the day you plant the hedge. You prune plants, the rest of the plants immediately after planting. You push compostable film over the pruned stumps, and you prune each year to get a layered effect. And again, I learned from the training I was giving during the week from the people who were there. We kind of reworded it to, you just cut the leaders every year rather than chase every bit. That's what I've always been doing, but I found it I didn't have the right words to explain it. We'll see in the pictures now. So for our to start off a good topped hedge, we plant your 5 per metre in a double staggered row. You prune it with your secateurs an inch or so above the ground, and instead of 1, you'll have 5. You push down your compostable film, and you put your tree guard on your occasional thorn trees. And then the second year, as I said, you come back and you prune the leaders, anything that's going to take off. And the other question that I had to think about when somebody said, well, okay, I've done it in year 1, I'm not going to do it anymore. But if you look at the picture top of the right, if you only do it once, or even at the bottom at the top of the left there. So if you think of one's tree stump, and now instead of 1 single tree, you have 4 or 5 crooked trees coming out of it, that's very unstable. And in fact, we have that in Kildalton, where I did that way back in 2004. I only cut it once, and you have a very kind of a wavering. It's not a good hedge, and they're liable to break off and disease get in. So where we're pruning, we need to keep pruning. We need this incremental cutting of the new hedge with your tree guard on your occasional thorn tree there, and off it goes. And all you do is walk down the grass at the side. I wouldn't even cut it. Cutting it encourages it. Walk it over maybe once. Hopefully we're trying once in the year to walk, because it will flop over. Now, it doesn't kill it, but the more you can keep it. So once a year, walk along both sides. We have the compostable film suppliers in Ireland, and yeah, they've said they will supply. Well, they will develop anything we want. I go for the wider the better. Obviously, it costs more. Mark, you were talking about having smaller rolls. Obviously, slightly higher cost to that. So in time they will develop anything we want as an industry. So best practice management at the top hedges, then we side trim over time from a wide base to a triangular profile. You cut the growing point to prevent escaping, and you leave the peak as high as possible, at least 1.5 meters. That's a minimum now, it's not the maximum, above the ground. And don't forget, in acres, just while I'm talking about it there, they're talking about 1.8. I would love to build the low ones gradually up to 1.8 to as high as possible, but just be careful there. If you're cutting any hedge where there's an acres area-based action, you don't cut it below 1.8, even in year 1. Retain occasional thorn saplings, and allow mature flowering and fruiting. Cut little and often. Now, look, whether that's 1 or 2 or 3 years, it depends on the hedge. What we don't want is this. Now, I know maybe that's a dramatic picture there, but you do see hedges. A lot of our hedges aren't fully whitethorn, and once they're left and tried to be cut with a flail, it's not good news. We don't want that for disease and for whatever. Yeah, okay. So then we'll turn to our tree line hedges. I used to call them escaped. It kind of had negative connotations. People were giving out to me, and rightly so. So never topped, I think, explains it. But we're calling them the tree line hedges. They're all beautiful. They're all super for biodiversity there. A grass margin wouldn't go astray and would stop things going through them. Although the sheep there would like to be right in under the hedge. So if that's the kind of a hedge you want, and we are in our signpost farms, we're encouraging farmers to have I must say must have, but we really are starting to measure how much hedges that everybody should have some some tree line, never topped hedges, because they are going to be buckets of fruit and flowers. But then, yeah, so we want both types. The biodiversity is primarily in the canopy in these kind of hedges. So you can see absolutely full of fruit and flowers. So food, 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 nest sites for some of the birds who nest up in that kind of a tree. So just beautiful. So for those hedges, it's sign trim only, do not top. And the saddest part is when people come in and cut those at a metre or two above the ground, it's really not, it's kind of the end of the hedge over time, I would suggest. Planting a new tree line hedge, you can't prune that one after planting because you want the single stem from day one. Use of compostable film is not possible, so any kind of mulch, we've considered sheep's wool there, in Kildalton, and we're it's a fantastic option. Listen, anything that keeps the light out will work. It's a case of what's practical, and for while sheep's wool is going to be super for a farmer who has it, and unfortunately worth only 60 cents a fleece, it's possibly a very good option if you're a sheep farmer growing hedges. I don't know that we can turn it into an industry, but that's for another day. Now, to address just a couple of other principles to remember when we're talking about hedges, to address the biodiversity crisis that we have, we must follow evidence-based recommendations, and we must consider all native biodiversity in the hedge, everywhere, in general in the biodiversity crisis, even the ugly ones. And a single species focus can be dangerous. So just be careful. Every action you take will have positive and negative consequences. But it's just to be very careful that, when we are talking about biodiversity, we're talking about all biodiversity, not just a single species. Now, you may do for an individual hedge. So, just remember that we're talking about all the bugs and bees associated with the hedge. And it's not always about the hedge species, so especially in the older hedges or relic hedges. Saying that, I think most people that are going planting a hedge will want either a good tree line hedge or a good topped hedge, and that makes sense. Okay, so moving on to my third theme of the acres. We had 7,500 farmers planting 2 million meters at 5 plants per meter. So that's where we get our 10 million plants needed. So 6,000, we have two schemes, and there is a important here. We have a scheme in Acres General and the Acres CP. So the Acres General have to plant it all in year one. Well, actually, the Acres CP have agreed to plant that much in year one as well, although they will probably not get approval before March. But the good news with the Acres CP for the future of the industry is they will be planting every year after this different hedges. So at least for the first time ever, and schemes have their own rules, and we can't always do what we would like to do, but in general for the RDP schemes, everything happens in the first year. But Acres CP is a new departure here, so 20,000 maybe or whatever of our farmers in acres. Now, while they're mainly in the uplands, and we certainly aren't planting trees in the uplands or any of the wet grassland areas, but most farms have lowlands, most farms have water. We can do with trees on practically every farm, even the ones that are on the lowland part of those farms that are in the CP area. So I would expect and hope that there'll be tree hedges planted for the next 4 years under Acres CP, which gives the industry and us all a good chance to kind of get things right. Okay, so hedge planting in acres, just a couple of the rules I mentioned, 5 per metre in the double staggered row. The 3 things which have changed have gone from early last year. The requirement to use 3 species is gone. That came through in a circular at the beginning of 2023. A lot of people missed these individual changes afterwards, and that no one species making up more than 70% of the total is gone. That had already moved to 85, but now it's gone altogether. So what means there is we can have 100% whitethorn. Now, I love my other species, but I love my Irish provenance more so. So that's why it went to 100% whitethorn, with the hope of it being Irish provenance. We'll come on to that in a moment. But now we have run out of the whitethorn even for the Irish provenance. So we'll come to that in a second. You still must purchase from a registered producer. You must retain the plant passport no matter where you get it from, whether it is imported or Irish provenance at this point. You must have the plant passport for the next 5 years while you're in acres. Protect from livestock with appropriate fence. There's no specific fence needed. It can be a single strand electric wire if that does the job. Control competing vegetation and replace failed plants in the following planting season. So then yeah, so this was the circular there that just came out. So I just worded it exactly like what it came, that participants who selected the whitethorn species as their chosen hedgerow species will no longer have to meet the Irish provenance or Irish origin requirement when purchasing plants from the department registered operators. Removal of Irish provenance relates to whitethorn species only. This is important now. It does not encompass the other 7 species, the holly and the blackthorn and those. You can only use those if they are Irish provenance, and the same with all the trees in acres, which we're not really talking about today. So this amendment applies to the new hedge in acres 1, acres 2, and the NPIs, which is the CP plans. Okay, so moving on from there, that's where we're at the moment. The future industry needs. It would be better if we were using Irish provenance. Native species are in tune with each other, with the timing and flowering, with the plants that have been here for the last 10,000 years. Irish provenance means Irish plants grown from seeds collected from Irish plants grown in Ireland for the past 10,000 years. The origin of plants or seeds will determine their adaptability, quality, and wildlife value. Trees of the same species adapted to different regions of Europe. So example, a whitethorn here versus a whitethorn grown in Eastern Europe can bud, burst, flower and seed at different times, and might fool our Irish birds, mammals and insects, which are adapted to our timings. And then the Irish tree sent abroad and the seedlings re-imported may be called Irish origin, but maybe carrying, well, it's always a danger if you're moving stuff about carrying pests and diseases. Or else I think Irish origin can also be where it's grown in Ireland, where a plant spends a season in the ground in Ireland. So Irish origin is so look, there are plant risks there's risks to everything. There are plant health risks to moving to hedgerow trees and plants from insects, other invertebrates. These are both native insects, and these are problems that will always arrive. The big one we're worried about with the well, I suppose the ash dieback is there, but the one we're worried about that has got a lot of attention lately is the fire blight, which is a bacteria disease for the whitethorn, which which could come in with imported plants. However, it's important to point out that there are rules on importation of plants. There's a notification of imports from within the EU and a pre-notification and phytosanitary certification of plants from non-EU countries. All plants must be accompanied by a specific protected zone plant passport. They can only be imported if they come from a protected zone, and DAPM conduct plant health surveillance checks. So there is a system in place from the disease point of view. Now, I suppose my more interest, again, I'm talking about the future, not for the moment, because we have to deal with where we are at the moment. but it would be better if we had Irish provenance. And just a couple of examples from the timing point of view, from the budding. The holly is the food plant of caterpillars of the holly blue butterfly, and they live in the flower buds of holly. So obviously they're timing to the budding of the holly. Similarly, the brown hair streak butterfly and its caterpillar feed on the delicate new blackthorn leaves in spring after hatching from eggs, which have overwintered on the plant. There are 62 species of moths associated with a monoculture whitethorn hedge. So as I said, we need to think about everything that's in the hedge, and whitethorn is absolutely superb. And that is an example there of the picture. In the picture is the figure of 8 moth, and you can see there why it feeds on whitethorn and blackthorn, and the moths are amazingly adapted color-wise. You wouldn't know it's there, and that's the whole idea of the moth, so the bird won't see it. Alder buckthorn is one of the food plants of the brimstone butterfly, and its green caterpillar. Look at that green caterpillar on the leaf. You wouldn't see it if you didn't realize it was there. So Jen, a couple of things that where Ireland and the Department of Agriculture and Forestry are trying to work with this issue, because I think from the disease point of view, the biodiversity, and purely the economic point of view, wouldn't it be better if we had an industry here supplying all our needs? And we can't depend on the schemes only for this. We have communities, we have individuals, we have lots of people who grow hedges outside the schemes, and I think the vast majority of those would love to have them coming from Ireland. So, but again, there's an FRM directive. There is a system here, is what I'm getting at. For the system is already in place. We need to led particularly or driven particularly by the Native Woodland Scheme. The Forest Service is responsible for implementing it. And I just putting up these slides so that you know that they're there. I won't go through them in detail. The Forest Service talked to us in the Woodlands of Ireland Technical Advisory Group about this. And again, so about collecting seed, it's all regulated is my point. So it is there to be a seed collector.
We're just at 5 past now, Catherine, just to let you know that.
Lovely. Yeah, thank you. Sorry now. Yeah, my points are anyway, there's regulation there for the seed collection, for the supply, for the traceability of plants. That is all there. And for anybody setting up, oh God, sorry now, why I don't know why this is
Unless you want to use the keys in your keyboard to move it on.
That's what I am using, yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. Okay, so again, registration and seed collection procedure. There is a procedure there if anybody needs to know. These presentations will be there afterwards. I said I'm not going. It was just more to make sure, because a lot of people don't realise that this is all there, and it is super. Yeah, okay. And marketing collected seed. Again, it's very, very, very well organised there by the Forest Service. So, and there is also new schemes here. There is the seed orchard scheme. Well, that has already been there, Forest Type 9. And I suppose, again, this is all coming from forestry, because they're interested in doing this themselves. You can see by the species there, they're not particularly the hedgerow species, but there is a seed orchard scheme there for the native species of the tree species. And then something that's new, the investment aid for the development of the forestry nursery service sector. It's actually open at the moment, but I think it will be open each year. And again, it supports commercial nurseries to enhance the quantity, quality and diversity of native tree species for all sorts of equipment to do with setting up. So this is all about setting up or encouraging the development of an industry producing seed from a biodiversity point of view, as well as a commercial forestry point of view. So from a biodiversity point of view, we're talking about native species and the minor species that wouldn't have been in the so this is just a couple of examples that we've been working. That was that's yew. I don't think farmers will be too many farmers will be planting yew as a tree, but that we were down at an event in Killarney National Park, and the seeds were just ready for collection. Again, this is from the Quilcha, where they have, I'm just showing a store where everything is traced. All those seeds are collected and traced and will be there forever. That was collected in 2012, and we still know where and when. Then there's a huge amount of work in when that seed, you can hold the seed, but then when it is going to be grown, there's years involved, or not years, but more than a year with some species involved in stratifying the seed, wet and cold and light and no light, mimicking nature. Then we move on to, that's down with Nunso Hardy, where we're looking at where the plants then move on and are sown out in the field and take 2 years to grow out in the field. So this is not something we can do overnight. And then this is, you may have seen this featured on Ear to the Ground last week. It was just amazing to see the people were very interested in the tractor and the machine, how they lifted the plants that are growing, their whitethorn plants being collected and put into bags and sold. So I suppose my vision or my wish would be that we would have an industry collecting seed for all our hedging species, and we need to do that now to be ready for. It'll take a few years to help, for all the minor species. So, Garamage.
Thank you, Catherine. You got through huge amounts there in relatively short time. So, I mean, that is a good message to be, sending out. I mean, that there is a potential to expand that part of the industry and that cultivation. It's very interesting to see that stratification. I hadn't come across that before, actually. So it does make
You could
sense.
do it yourself between your hot press and keeping things in light and dark, and every species has its own requirement. There's a fantastic book called Our Trees, which was brought out for the millennium, and it's there on the website for anybody that wants to do their own at home, gather their own seed and do it. But it's not for the faint-hearted as an industry. And I think it's a different person that'll be collecting the seed than will be growing it on. Do you know what I mean? Anyway, it can be done.
Well, there's one group that are very happy about your presentation, Catherine. It's the beekeepers of Ireland. The few mentions there from the beekeepers across Ireland around the importance of hedgerows for bees and associated wildlife as well. So I think, look, we have a lot of questions coming in here. So I think, Pat, we'll get straight into them, because some more technical ones on acres. But maybe, Pat, if you'd like to get us going
Yeah,
there.
I suppose the first there's a couple of questions there on fire blight disease, and I know you mentioned it, and it is a risk to hedgerows, and is there anything we can do to prevent it?
Well, prevention is better than cure. There's no cure. So to be sure, you only use Irish provenance. But we live in the real world, and we don't have enough Irish provenance. So I suppose you're depending on the system working then.
Yeah, so another question here, under acres, do you need to plant trees in hedgerows? For example, planting 300 meters of hedging, is there a requirement for planting trees every 10 to 15 meters?
Yes, but my preference would be the whitethorn tree.
And
So
let that
yes,
grow
that
up
is the
in
tree. Yes.
yeah.
As I said, you can plant the others so that's the answer.
Can whitethorn that were planted 3 or 4 years ago but not well maintained since be topped back significantly to encourage base growth?
That's the really most common and most relevant question, Pat, because that's relevant to all the now. You absolutely you can, and if you're ever cutting, go back to the base. Now, I have a slight worry because we did it in Clonakilty a few years ago. It was about a 10-year-old hedge, and I was kind of assumed at that stage it wouldn't need the film, because that would be the advantage, that you could go back in and not have to put down the film. But it really struggled. Now we'll have to have another go at it. But so you can absolutely do it if you put down a mulch such as the compostable film. Now I hope people, I'd say, would be hoping not to have to do that. And I mean, if you're doing that, the right time to do it is day one, because then you get all the benefits out of it. You have a massive hedge from all the protection it gets. as well. But the answer, Pat, is yes, you can, like, look at what we're doing in Coppison, is we're doing that with 200-year-old hedges. But
Okay.
always go to the base.
You mentioned, and it might be worth a mention, you mentioned that you, down in Clonakilty, but you have established right around the country a series of demonstrations. Is it worth just mentioning what you do with those, and will you be having events at those this year again?
Yeah, I think so. We, rather than walking people around a lot of fields, I came up with and it's really good idea, of 10 meters each year for the next 10 years, so that, you know, you can, here's one I prepared earlier and earlier and earlier. And so it's, I think once farmers see that topped hedge being demonstrated, they buy it. They absolutely buy it. Now, whether they go and do it or not, do you know, but they totally get it. But to buy your lovely 2-foot plants and put them into the ground and go cutting them off at the base, that takes courage, and you really need to see it a year on. So that's what we've done. And then I think one of the advisors, Anthony Deneen, said to me, he said, you can't keep talking about the tree line hedge if you're not showing it. So now we've subsequently now, alongside or very near our topped hedge, we're doing our 10-meter tree line hedge every year. So either in year 10, 12 years time, we can come back and lay it, or we can leave it as a tree line hedge forever, which I absolutely love. So we're kind of just trying to show what should be on every farm, a mix of that. And some farmers will like one more than the other. And yeah, so that's on all our
and you have those at most of the
yes, and you're right,
target research and colleges.
Yeah, and the first week of September, Hedgerow Week, we've no doubt we'll be going back with events to all of those. Yeah.
Catherine, we have a few questions here from people who have maybe a 2 or 3 year old hedge, but didn't actually coppice it or cut back at the start. When is it too late to do that, or does it
That was
depend on the
Pat's question
species?
really, Mark, there, and that's year 200 you can do it.
Year
So you
200,
can
okay.
do it anytime, but the question is, do you need to do the vegetation management?
Yeah.
You know, yeah.
Okay. That's
can you
advice.
make tree-lined hedges stock-proof?
No.
Good. Quick
No.
answer.
And stock-proof isn't, in fact, most farmers don't even think they can be stock-proof, if you know what I mean. It's usually not the it's not the main reason they're growing the hedge. So yeah, no, I wouldn't aim
Just a specific question. Any problem using sheep's wool on a hedge as its category 3 waste?
Yes, I only heard that last night from my own colleague Noel Claffey when I was looking for sheep's wool for him to bring around the country to my other sites. So I have to look into that further. I'll be back to you, Pat, on that one.
Okay.
I don't know. As I said, Noel alerted me to that last night when I asked him, could I have sheep's wool to bring around the country?
It seems that derogation for non-Irish grown hawthorn is a dangerous situation. Should we be planting other species until we can get a supply of homegrown? But I think the problem is the supply of all of them.
We don't have any. The reason only the whitethorn is there is because we had very little of the others. We were never. That's why we were back to 100% whitethorn way back, because the others weren't around. In general, now I speak for, and if anybody has them, please let me know. You'll have no problem getting rid of them this year anyway.
Question here around the possibility of an extension that the department might grant to hedgerow planting in acres.
Yeah, the department certainly can't grant it. Maybe they can go and ask in Europe, but listen, the schemes are very strict, as we know, and you see you're being paid for your work in year 5 years, so it messes up all the calculations. I don't know.
Yeah. Just it's seems to be a question.
And the other point, Mark, to that is next year isn't going to be much better.
Yeah.
That's why I particularly went through the example of what needs from collecting to selling. It's 4 years maybe.
Yeah.
There's a question here about for farmers receiving payment that they are provided with training, but are contractors being trained in the same way where they're doing the work?
Contractors for hedge planting, I wonder.
Yeah.
No, I'm sure. I to be honest, I find people who work with hedges with planting are very understanding. But the problem is they will do what the farmer wants, and the farmer doesn't understand. So I'm not so sure that they'd be pushing it or encouraging it. But yeah, it's ultimately the farm. Yeah, no, not formally, Pat.
Is elder a good hedgerow tree?
I wonder, are they talking elder or alder? Elder is not good for the hedge, so it's soft and it's floppy, and when you cut it inappropriately, it's even worse because then it budgeons out to maybe 12 feet wide. All can be in a tree line hedge. This is the beauty of the tree line hedge. You could put all our 20 native species in it and let them off and let them, do what they like. And that's why we need the tree line ones. We've lots of elder in the country. I wouldn't be removing it. It's absolutely fantastic but I wouldn't be putting it into my top hedge.
Okay, there was an inquiry. Could you show the detail of the plastic suppliers again? Or the other alternative is we will have the presentation up and you can download the presentation and it's in that.
Yeah.
Um, do you need to turn a sod when planting a new hedgerow, or could you just
Okay,
plant directly into the ground?
really good question. I always do for ease of planting. And I make it clear that's the reason I'm doing it. Sometimes, again, people who plant hedges have fantastic tools. If the soil is wet, in general, the soil is good enough, if you know what I mean, but it's a lot easier to plant it. I always give the example of in 2006 when we went around the country and had an event in every county planting hedges with a digger because I insisted on it, and came home to my own farm, said I wouldn't bother, and within half an hour we're gone for the digger.
And are there any other tools that people you see using
Well, ploughing, certainly if you're a tillage farmer in Oak Park last year, they used the plough perfectly. Maybe a little bit more awkward for planting into, but
Hmm.
that use whatever, anything that makes it easier to put it to. Then you walk along with a spade and two people, and you fly along then putting them in, and you put them to the right depth. Exactly. You plant them to the same depth as were previously planted. You don't bury the roots. You don't leave them sticking up. You cut the roots if necessary, but if you have cultivated ground, you won't need to do that.
Yeah, and just for people, the sequence is you do your planting and then you put your
And
mulch
then,
in,
yes, Mark, that's
after.
really good,
Yeah.
because even when they're looking at it in the field, we
Mm.
often, you plant it first, you cut, and then you push the prune plant or push the plastic over the pruned plant, except for that. Go with your tree guard first and put it on your one in every 10 meters so that you won't have it chopped off before you forget. But yes,
Yeah,
you push it over so that, because if you do it the other way around would be horrendously more complicated, but also it would leave a much bigger hole. You just wouldn't do it.
yeah. And your trees, then you maybe would you plant them after the mulch
No,
goes
no,
down,
I
or
no, no. They'll be in the row of the, like.
you
I
just
suppose
cut
the way
it
I do
and
it, if in the ideal world, if I had my Irish provenance of the other species, I'd have my 85% whitethorn. So I'll only have one. I'd fly along with one row of every. So it's about a foot between the rows, full of whitethorn, and then the next row every maybe third or fourth or fifth plant would be another. So it could be a blackthorn, it could be a holly, it could be you pull out of the other bag. So it's kind of a nice system there. We going if
you
when
you
you
have
know what
some
you're planting.
you have some videos up on YouTube, I
Yeah,
think,
lots of
that you.
videos. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So if anyone wants to take a look, they're on the Teagasc section on YouTube.
Uh, Another couple of questions here, quick fire ones. Thanks, Catherine, for a great presentation. Is the nursery grant scheme open up for startups?
I assume so. I am not an expert at all. I said that was a presentation by Enda
Yeah.
Coates, I think, to us. So contact the Forestry Service. Contact our own foresters, actually, Pat. Our own Teagasc foresters would be super to help. And can I just say too, just coming from yesterday from the biodiversity the launch of it, and meeting a lot of the biodiversity officers, which are now in every county, and they're very, very positive about working with all of this. And maybe I would love to see this on a county base. Now, maybe a county is too small, but so like if you could have local funding for for promoting it, and even making sure that everybody in Leitrim was, county councils, communities, schools, everybody was thinking of who's in Leitrim supplying. Maybe they won't be supplying all, but do you know what I'm getting at? So we
Yeah.
need the biodiversity officers are 100% behind us on this. Maybe as well as it's not all about the money. We need to develop the market as well, because people don't realize what they're buying.
Right. Yeah, and there's a follow on. Do you think it's a potential for some farmers to become small tree nurseries over the next few years, or is that something that would require a lot of expertise and a lot of paperwork? And it make it really
Yeah,
difficult.
it's not for everybody, Pat. I mean, it's possibly something I'd love to do if I retired, but I'm not
Don't
going
go
yet.
yet.
But it's not for everybody. And as I said, there's different aspects of the job for everybody. So obviously you need a little bit of land for doing it, but it may not necessarily be a farmer. It could be a farmer. Yeah, it's somebody, yeah, could be
Do I
anybody.
need to use spiral guards to protect my hedging plants, same as trees using
Ah,
tree guards?
then you're eliminating any bit of growth at the base. It's very expensive. No, I wouldn't do it. I've seen them done in gardens or in places. I mean, but the reason people might be tempted to use them would be the rabbits and the hares. So a couple of points on that. Um, First of all, that's the reason I do plant later in the season. Now, later being very dangerous to go too late because especially once you plant kind of, I used to always say St. Patrick's Day. I was a bit late in Kildalton last year and it came very dry. Now, it was at the end of my tour of the country and I don't know, we were into maybe nearly April when the season was when they were coming out of the cold store and they struggled a bit. I've never had that before. So, but bearing that in mind, I've never had a problem with planting them in March, providing you have the time to do them then. And in 6 weeks, they're ahead of the rabbits. That's all you want them to be, rather than sitting in the ground for 4 months doing nothing. If you do have a problem, there's lots of suggestions about lime and slurry and different things. The only thing I found effective is 2 strands of electric wire, one at 6 inches and one at 18 inches around the hedge. For that only short, very, very short period to get them away. Yeah.
A question there, what's the ecological benefit of banks associated with hedges?
Oh, amazing. And carbon, Pat. So now I don't think we'd probably create a bank because where we get the soil, we'd be doing more disturbance. So that's more about existing, unless again you're in a very wet area. We've done demos before. I remember in Leitrim one time we did ding a drain like they did Longo and made a bank. But in general, you wouldn't be doing that. But you could.
And in some cases, potentially for water, where you might hold back a little bit of water.
Yes, actually, aren't you talking about that measure, Pat? So
Absolutely.
maybe that's more relevant than I thought. It's just I wouldn't do it unless you had a reason to do it. But I suppose existing banks is what I really don't want touched from a carbon or a biodiversity. Again, thinking of that bigger picture of biodiversity. Sometimes people would say the best place for the bank was under the head, to knock it down and begin again, and I would not do that.
Yeah, there's a lot of benefits, particularly from a sediment loss perspective as well. Catherine, questions coming in around you talked about sourcing hedgerows from some seed or that process, but what about propagation from slips or cuttings?
Again, I'd be looking up
successful?
I'd be looking up my Our Trees bookmark, but I am for whitethorn. Now it can grow, and I always say try it, but it's not. I wouldn't put anyone to the trouble of doing it and even one farmer told me lately they appeared to grow and then they died. So I don't know. It's not the normal way. If you were talking about willow, Sally, it's the normal way. So every species has its method of propagation, and cuttings is absolutely fine for some and possible for all, but not recommended.
And if a farmer hasn't opted to include hedgerow planting in his or her plan, acres plan, is there opportunity for them to change their minds, or are they committed to same measures?
Not in acres general, but in acres CP, which you'll know yourself if you are in that. It's an annual plan, which is super. Obviously a lot more administration, but it's a super departure and will be super for the hedgerows as well.
And in terms
it's potentially one of your measures if you need it under eco schemes, and
yes.
those will potentially. Those will potentially change over the years, because there may be some questions as to whether people get away with the area for nature that's currently there on an ongoing basis.
That's a good point. All right, yeah. Catherine, just to your thoughts about planting Irish apple trees and Irish blackcurrant raspberry bushes at random intervals along hedgerows. Is that something that's an option, or I mean, there's kind of, I suppose, multiple benefits there.
Multiple benefits. I suppose I'd be tending to keep them in an orchard. Like they're the traditional. People get a little bit mixed up with the traditional orchard. It's not actually native. Because apple trees weren't here the 10,000 years ago. A traditional orchard has a kind of slightly different function. It certainly is fantastic for associated biodiversity. I suppose in the acres point of view, you're talking about the 5 per metre of the everything needs to be Irish provenance. So I'd be a little bit careful there. But look, in general, for the people who want to do that, yeah, it's fine. Like the crab apple would be the one you'd put in the hedge if you're, you know, is the native species.
A question in relation to the spacing of across of the fencing for hedgerow protection.
Okay, well, I'd be absolutely 3 meters from fence to fence. And again, can I give the story because it makes so much sense? Trying to think, and we were doing a farm walk on Tipperary years ago, and he happened to be a fencing contractor. And when we were starting from scratch and said, where will we put the fence? And he walked out the 3 meters, and the other farmers looked at him, what are you doing? And he said, I'm making my money putting up fences for farmers where the hedges is put up against them. He said, I'm not going to do the same for myself. And it's just so like it's you just need to think 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road. But the temporary fence, I suppose, could be a bit closer, but it's not worth it. Put it out with
No, it's a good point because it does look when you're doing it, it looks
huge.
3 meters does
Correct.
look like a lot, but
and keep if it's a cows or cattle, keep the wire really high that they'll graze in right under it. So come out a meter, your plants will be in a meter with the film, and then another meter, and that meter then would be grazed by under the wire by animals.
But for sheep, I imagine
sheep obviously would be sheep wire, and then you want the cutters coming down inside it to.
Yeah. I think we've a comment here from somebody involved in the nursery stock industry, and I think it's very relevant to read out. It says in Ireland there are established nursery stock. There's an established nursery stock industry. This industry generates significant exports. Teagasc is specialist. There is capacity to produce native hedge. Notice of demand is required, especially scheme changes need to be communicated to growers a number of years in advance. Most of the skills being discussed are common amongst people trained in horticulture that they should be tapped into. And I think this is something that has been discussed with the Department of Agriculture in relation to schemes. They need to be deciding a couple of years out and maybe taking a little bit of the risk out of this for some of the
look, Pat, we understand rules with the department and with Europe. You can guarantee nothing, but listen, I would put $1 million. We'll be planting trees in 5 years' time. We'll be planting more trees year after, talking about things. We can't always depend on the schemes. We need to do it and market it to all the other people who are planting. You know, I feel sorry for what the Department of Agriculture get criticised. I mean, they were very brave to do this, you know, to support us this far. And they will again, I have no doubt. So we all need to work together. And as I said, all I can say is that, and we don't need maybe as much as this year, but we need a steady stream of all the species.
Our horticultural specialist, Donald Flanagan, has been in touch with us to say that if there are people that are interested in getting into this growing of hedgerow stock, to reach out to him. He's a lot of advice he can offer, and there is a scope there for registering as a part-time seed collector as well. So there's support there for anybody who's interested in maybe diversifying their operation. We're just at coming up to 10:30, Catherine, but just before we leave, I do want to share the details of the upcoming water quality conference that your team, Pat and the team, are organizing. It's taking place on, what date do we have it on there? Maybe Pat, you want to talk to this? 7th of February.
Again, it's aimed predominantly at advisors and people working with farmers in support of water quality, as regulators, etc. It'll be a full day's look at what's happening in the water quality space, practical elements and regulatory elements as well.
Brilliant. And so you can register for that on a Teagasc website, or just Google Teagasc Water Quality Conference 2024. I'm sure it'll bring you to it. And also just remind everybody that our Signpost team are organising the Environmental Sustainability Awards for 2024 with a prize fund of up to 30,000. So if you or if you're have clients that might be eligible, please do look up the details of that. It's available on the Teagasc website. Closing date, I think, is the end of February for that. So not far away for that. So Catherine, thanks again so much for joining us today. Huge number of people joining us this morning. So this is obviously a really topical area for people. We'll have those slides up on our on the Teagasc website over the next few days if people want to get those details. I think the details of those suppliers are already on the website, the suppliers of the compostable film that's available on the hedgerow section of the Teagasc website. And thanks to Yvonne Maher in the background for helping with on the technical side. And next week, we're going to be celebrating World Wetlands Day. And we are going to be joined by Dr. Micheál Callahan, who's Development Officer with the Community Wetlands Forum. And he's going to be talking about community-led actions for wetlands and lessons learned from Community Wetlands Forum. So do join us next Friday for that. Until then, have a nice weekend, and we will talk to you next week. Thank you.